Welcome to the world of horror and mystery, where today we unveil a true story filled with horrifying crimes and chilling details that freeze the blood. In Poland, there was a serial killer known as the Vampire, a man who filled the streets with indescribable terror. The Ministry of Defense even offered a large reward for anyone who could provide information leading to his capture. Warning: this story contains terrifying details and may not be suitable for younger audiences. If you're a fan of horror and mystery stories, we invite you to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with the latest thrilling stories. Stay with us as we dive deep into this dark story and uncover the life of a killer who instilled fear in people's hearts and changed their way of life. The legend of Poland's serial killer, the vampire who terrified generations. Welcome to the world of horror and mystery, where today we unveil an unbelievable story filled with brutal crimes and chilling details that freeze the blood. In Poland, there was a serial killer known as the Vampire, a man who filled the streets with indescribable terror. The Ministry of Defense even set a large reward for anyone who could provide information leading to his capture. If you are a fan of horror and mystery stories and want to hear the full details, please like this video and subscribe to the channel to stay updated with all our new content. Stay tuned as we dive deep into this dark story and learn about a killer who instilled fear in people's lives and changed their way of living. He was dubbed the Vampire. His actions changed the behavior and lifestyle of the people in his country to such an extent that the Ministry of Defense announced special measures to try to capture him, even offering a reward worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for any information about him. If you're interested in mystery and horror stories and want to hear the full details, support this video with a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories and videos. Starting in 1964, a series of brutal murders began to occur in the Dąbrowa Basin and Upper Silesia regions of Poland. There was one thing that connected all the people who were viciously attacked and killed in these crimes. They were all women. The infamous, unidentified killer became known as the Vampire of Zagłębie. Throughout the time the killer roamed free, the streets in all nearby areas were filled with terror. The killer we'll discuss today is Zdzisław Marchwicki, a Polish serial murderer. This is the story of his horrific reign, which lasted for 6 years from 1964 to 1970. Today, we'll dive deeply into the life circumstances surrounding the infamous killer, known as the Vampire of Zagłębie. Many have heard of the Vampire of Zagłębie, and many people from that time remember him as a brutal murderer. But few truly know the life and past of this vampire. His name was Zdzisław Marchwicki, born on October 8, 1927. He was the child of a lower social class family that lived in the city of Dąbrowa Górnicza in southern Poland. His father married 5 times, making it clear that Zdzisław belonged to a fractured and unhappy family. His father was an alcoholic who never supported the family, and his mother, who had no job, had to take care of the children in every way. He had 3 brothers and 1 sister, and we'll discuss those siblings later. As for Zdzisław himself, he didn't finish his education due to his average intelligence and lack of interest in studies. Although there isn't much available information about his early life, some stories emerged from the memoirs he wrote in prison. According to his writings, his mother passed away when he was young, and he admitted that he was never a top student, as he was more interested in girls and women than in studying. There are also records and documents showing he worked in the iron mines in Zawadski, in the city of Dąbrowa Górnicza, even though he was underage at the time. Following in his father's footsteps, Zdzisław grew up to become an alcoholic. His memoirs also mention a woman named Maria Marcinska, who was apparently his wife. He wrote that his marriage to Maria was far from ideal. He drank heavily and preferred to be with his friends rather than spending time with his wife at home. In turn, his wife complained that Zdzisław mistreated her. Through his writings and memoirs, his early descent into darkness becomes evident, as he described being fascinated by the sight of dead women, lying there lifeless and completely bare. He wrote about how the smell of blood excited him to the extent that he once scratched himself to make himself bleed, just to feel that sensation. On November 7, 1964, an emergency incident occurred in the administrative capital of Silesia, the city of Katowice. A 15-year-old girl was found dead, her body discarded by the roadside. According to experts, an unknown killer first struck her on the head with a heavy object, which caused her immediate death. However, the killer did not stop there, inflicting multiple brutal blows on her body, which was already lifeless. The body was discovered about 10 meters from where she was killed, with drag marks and blood trails on the ground revealing this. The autopsy determined she had been struck multiple times on the head with a heavy object. Following her death, her body was dragged approximately 10 meters. Although there were no signs of sexual assault, her coat buttons were undone, her skirt was lifted, and her genital area was exposed. Despite the intervention and investigation by the Ministry of Defense, the killer was not apprehended. Multiple attacks on women continued to occur in the following months. On the 20th day of the first month of 1965, a woman named Eva Bakken was found dead in the city of Gilad. About 2 months later, another woman named Lydia Novaska was murdered in the city of Bergen. On the 14th of May of the same year, a third woman named Irina Szmajska was attacked, but luckily she managed to escape. At this point, investigators began connecting all these crimes that had occurred in southern Poland. How did they make the connection? And why did they link these cases together in the first place? Simply put, all the victims were women, and all were attacked in the same manner. They were struck from behind with a heavy object. That was the first clue. Secondly, and more importantly, all the attacks took place in the vicinity of one area, the Zagłębie-Dąbrowski region. Consequently, it was assumed that all these attacks were the work of one person, who was soon dubbed the Vampire of Zagłębie. The peak of this vampire's activity was in 1965. During that time, more and more women began to disappear, and the entire region of Silesia was gripped by fear. Rumors spread to the extent that some people claimed the vampire was from Zagłębie itself and planned to kill 1,000 women in commemoration of the 1,000th anniversary of the founding of the Polish state. The terror grew to such a level that women began avoiding going out at night, and when they had to, they would ask a man to accompany them. Following a special summit held by the Ministry of Defense in July 1965, it was decided to consolidate all previous cases into a single investigation. At this point, the operation to hunt down the Vampire of Zagłębie began. The assaults often took place in open areas, with the killer stalking his victims and attacking them suddenly. Generally, he was accustomed to striking his victims on the head to knock them unconscious, then dragging the bodies to more isolated locations. Most of the vampire's victims were found in positions with their legs spread apart, though penetration of the genital area was only reported in separate cases unrelated to these crimes. There were no reports of the vampire attempting to obtain any sexual benefit from his victims. The perpetrator's method also included rummaging through his victims' bags, scattering their contents, and occasionally stealing certain items. His extensive network of connections and excellent knowledge of the area's geography allowed him to evade punishment for a long time, causing waves of panic, heightened anxiety, and ultimately transforming him into a terrifying legend among the residents of Zagłębie and Silesia. He frequently targeted women in 4 local towns, and during the first 2 years of his activities, the vampire committed 14 crimes, including 9 murders and 5 attempted murders. In post-war Poland, this case was unprecedented. Law enforcement agencies, unable to identify the perpetrator, appealed to the public for assistance, offering a reward of 1 million zlotys, Poland's currency, to anyone who could provide information leading to the vampire's arrest. Numerous communication channels were set up to allow people to report their information, ensuring complete confidentiality for anyone who contacted the police. As a result of these efforts, thousands of messages and calls poured in, each meticulously examined. Meanwhile, the military warned women against walking alone in secluded areas, and husbands began accompanying their wives to and from work, while parents no longer allowed their adult daughters to go out at night. The vampire made sure to kill random women, leaving no traces that could lead back to him. However, most of the victims were young women, often seen walking alone at night. In 1965, the Defense Command in the city of Katowice established a group of experts and investigators, naming it Zagłębie, with the mission of catching the serial killer. The name was later changed to Anna, in honor of the first victim of Marchwicki. Officer Jerzy Gruba led the entire operation, involving the best operational and investigative officers from Katowice in the case. To expedite the case, leading scientists in criminology, psychology, and sociology were called in for consultation, and the most advanced tools were used in the search for the predator. Despite all these efforts, no results were achieved. Perhaps the biggest breakthrough came when the body of Julianta Gierk was found in the Buszcza River. This young woman was the niece of the secretary of the Polish United Workers' Party. More than 300 men were suspected, including Marchwicki. After consulting scientists to profile the killer, several psychological and mental profiles of 7 different hypothetical personalities were developed, any one of whom could be the murderer. However, this girl's case was unique, and the possibility of political motives behind the crime was also considered. But, as we know, the Vampire of Zagłębie attacks his victims based on opportunity. The killer's last crime was Jadwiga Kościenka's murder, committed on March 4, 1970. On that day, a man named Piotr Ozoła was accused of the same crime, and he confessed. Piotr was a mentally ill welder from the city of Sosnowiec. Generally, there was no direct evidence against him, but after a few days he killed his family, set his house on fire, and committed suicide. Later, the police received an anonymous letter stating that the murder of Jadwiga was the last and that they would never be able to catch the perpetrator. To this day, no one knows who sent the letter. In the 7th month of 1970, police officers in the Anna group identified 483 psychological and mental profiles that the killer would likely possess based on information analyzed from previous cases. As a result, a group of 267 people came under suspicion, and Marchwicki was one of them. Marchwicki was initially arrested after his wife filed a complaint of abuse against her and their children in 1972. At the time, 45-year-old Marchwicki had previously been punished for insulting military officers by an order from the authorities in Silesia. It was later revealed that in his place of residence, he was known for his alcohol addiction and was often detained and punished by the judiciary. 3 days after his arrest, on the 9th of January 1972, a large photograph of Marchwicki appeared on the front pages of all newspapers in Zagłębie and Silesia, with information stating, "The suspect in the series of brutal crimes has been apprehended." After 2 years of investigations, specifically in September 1974, the trial of the Vampire of Zagłębie began. Due to the massive public interest in the case, it was announced that the sessions would be held in the Zinc Factory Club in Silesia, in the city of Katowice. The hall, which accommodated 800 people, was fully booked. After several months, authorities arrested 2 of Marchwicki's brothers, Henryk and Jan. Shortly thereafter, another accomplice in the latest crime, Józef Klimek, was also detained. The presentation of evidence and the entire trial process began in the second half of 1974 and concluded at the end of the 7th month of 1975. By the end, the court in Katowice ruled that Marchwicki would be sentenced to death for the murder of 14 women and the attempted murder of 6 others. The trial of the Vampire of Zagłębie relied solely on circumstantial evidence from start to finish, lacking any concrete proof condemning Marchwicki. At the beginning of the trial, the defendant retracted his initial confessions, in which he had admitted guilt, and suddenly denied responsibility. Investigators noted that the defendant exhibited strange behaviors during the interrogation. For instance, when asked to sign his confessions, he wrote at the bottom of the page, "All of this is a lie." At one point, he even took the confession paper and tried to swallow it. Thus, in the vampire's trial, no direct evidence was presented to confirm the defendant's involvement. The investigation lasted 2 years, with the case file reaching 166 volumes. Ultimately, Marchwicki was accused of 14 murders and 7 attempted murders. The lawyers justified their decision based on the defendant's history, which included physical abuse and mistreatment of his family members, disrespect toward the police, and numerous other offenses. The court relied, among other things, on testimonies from individuals who could have been Marchwicki's victims, identifying him as the one who attacked them. In addition, Zygmunt was also condemned based on his wife's testimony, who portrayed him as a sadist who harmed her and their children, describing him as a troublemaker. However, the situation later changed when his wife altered her statements, admitting that she was often the instigator of fights with her husband and that she had struck him. John Marchwicki was implicated in the murder of the last woman and was consequently sentenced to death despite having been in training to become a priest. Henryk Marchwicki, on the other hand, was sentenced to 25 years in prison, where he died in 1998 under unclear circumstances while serving his sentence. He reportedly fell down the stairs and broke his back. At the end of the trial, Zygmunt Marchwicki showed signs of surrender, and when asked by the court if he had any final words, he said, "I want to go where I need to go." In the 7th month of 1975, the regional court in Katowice found Marchwicki guilty of the charges brought against him and sentenced him to death. His brother John received the same sentence for inciting the murder of Jadwiga Kościenka. Henryk Marchwicki was sentenced to 25 years for his role in the murder, while the remaining defendants were given prison terms ranging from 4 to 5 years. On April 26, 1977, the death sentence was carried out against the two brothers in a police department garage in Katowice. Before his execution, Marchwicki shouted that he was innocent. Here's a professional English translation of your text. Both Władysław Marchwicki and the murders he allegedly committed have been widely discussed in the media. The true identity of the vampire became a matter of suspicion after a Polish television program named Paragraph 148, Killer on Trial, questioned the real identity of the Vampire of Zagłębie. In this program, Marchwicki was presented as innocent. The entire situation was portrayed with the assumption that the trial against Władysław was nothing more than a show for the media, and the court's decision, as well as questions about Władysław's innocence, began to be raised by the public. Another TV documentary, Jestem mordercą, suggested that Marchwicki was indeed innocent. This information stirred mixed feelings among people and sparked numerous debates. Was the accusation against Marchwicki simply a hoax? Was it all an act to make people in the country feel safe? Or was the real killer actually Piotr Oszczoka? We may never know. One of the most crucial aspects of this story is that Władysław Marchwicki never admitted guilt, which significantly undermines the justice of the court. His family claimed he was a very simple man who, even in his studies, could not progress beyond the 4th grade, and with his limited intelligence, it was easy to manipulate him. In some way, he was pressured into confessing to the crimes. When he tried to retract his confession, he was cleverly asked to write down what he was retracting, and in this way, he admitted once again. Suddenly, he became confused and provided a higher number of victims than was actually listed in the charges. He was exonerated from one crime he had confessed to because it was proven that it hadn't happened in the first place. These details opened up debates about the fairness of the court that he faced. In the 1990s, a Polish journalist named Grażyna Starzewska decided to reach out to people who were involved in the Marchwicki brothers' case. Military officials, prosecutors, judges, lawyers, and others. The stories of these individuals shed additional light on the investigation and trial of the killer of the century. Following Marchwicki's arrest, some police officers in the Anna squad doubted whether the accused was indeed responsible for the crimes attributed to the vampire. As the journalistic investigations continued, the number of people who doubted Marchwicki's guilt or innocence grew. Marchwicki stated for months in court that he was not guilty, and according to journalist Grażyna Starzewska, a team of Poland's best investigators interrogated the vampire, and security personnel remained in his cell, aiming to extract confessions for the crimes. In the end, Marchwicki did confess to the crimes, but he could never provide the correct number of victims nor details about how the attacks unfolded. During the journalistic investigations, Grażyna Starzewska examined the interrogation records of Marchwicki on May 10, 1972, marking the first recorded confessions of the vampire. Here's a professional translation. This investigation included statements like, "Help me, officer, what should I say?" Or, "All right, how many of these crimes did I commit?" Aside from Marchwicki's confessions, there was no strong evidence to prove his guilt. Expert examinations of all evidence, as well as of Marchwicki himself, yielded negative results and proved nothing. However, as confirmed by several individuals closely involved in the case, they told journalists that those in charge of the investigation were eager to close the case as quickly as possible. The security forces needed a success to showcase, and it was said that the authorities in Katowice significantly influenced the pace of the investigations. A member of the prosecution who was part of the investigations for 5 years before resigning stated, "When Marchwicki was arrested, there were no questions and no attempts were made to search for any other possible suspects." The same individual spoke out 20 years later, calling Marchwicki's execution a murder in the name of the law. This is the story, the terrifying case of the Polish serial killer who mercilessly murdered 14 women and injured several others. Investigations into his crimes lasted 2 full years, and the case file grew to 166 volumes. Marchwicki's sister, Helena, was accused of selling the belongings of his victims, which her brother brought to her. For years, Zdzisław was the reason women in southern Poland lived in fear, dreading the possibility of dying at the hands of this monster. But we are left with one question: was the true killer really caught? Finally, thank you to everyone who participated, listened, and subscribe to join us on this journey with the channel. Your support motivates us to keep going and to bring you more thrilling stories. Stay tuned and see you soon in a new adventure.